At the beginning, we people were like the animals. We reaped and used the resources around us. We were hunter-gatherer and subsisted on what the nature abundantly offered us. Just like the animals, we lived from one day to the other without much contemplating what the future brings. But then, due to the progress, on one side something wonderful and on the other side, however, something terrible happened to our mind. We became aware of the fact that we are mortal. We became afraid of the death, and we asked ourselves what losses the future will bring. And this as solely the only species on Earth. This was the beginning of a great tragedy, but also of a great opportunity, since you are afraid of death, of pain and captivity in a way that no resource can ever provide. The greatest resource that men are able to control are neither the natural resources, nor tools, machines or buildings, but other people. It is possible to scare animals, because animals are afraid of having pain in this instance. But it is impossible to make animals get scared with the loss of their freedom, with the prospect of captivity or torture in the future, because animals don't have any awareness of the future at all. It is also not possible to point a weapon towards a tree and order it to bear more fruits. You also cannot threaten a field either to produce more wheat, else it will be set on fire. You also don't get more eggs from an hen when intimidating it. But you can bring a human to give in all his or her valuables and give up his or her freedom when you threaten him or her. This way of human farming had become the most profitable and most destructive occupation of all history of mankind. And we just reached the most destructive pinnacle. You cannot understand humanity rationally if you don't look at it the way it actually is. An accumulation of farms in which, as owners, humans possess and exploit other humans. A lot of people will see this description as absurd, and they will say that the government provides protection and health system, electricity, water supply, streets and schools. These people really think that goodwill and goodness is their intention, but nothing is more far from reality. Farmers also care about the health of their livestock and provide shelter, food and all necessary basic things, so their livestock is more productive, but at the same time they keep them in captivity. People think that they have their liberties, and people firmly believe that the rulers protect their liberties. Farmers allow their livestock a certain free zone. They give them a larger run area and more free movement. But only because they know that due to this procedure the animals will produce more meat, milk and eggs. Our so-called liberal democrats are nothing more than farms, which run ownership of humans in order to reap efficiency and as their main goal to earn very much taxes. Our owner permits us certain liberties, not because he sees our liberties as a natural right, which belongs to us, but because he wants to increase his revenues and thus his profit with us. Are you guys beginning to understand the nature of this prison in which we are born into? In history there are 4 phases of human farming. The first phase was the direct and brutal use of force. They were able to keep the single subjects under control, but they were not able to motivate the creative productivity of the human mind with whiplashes and chains. Slave workers were deliberately unproductive and restive. The rulers needed a great effort to control and animate them. In the second phase, the slaves got a certain limited form of liberty to be creative and intuitive. Thereby, their productivity was increased for their owners. Also, the government was getting more wealthy, since they could earn more taxes and thus expand their power. During the third phase, the serfs were established. In this phase they were permitted to till a section of land, but were forced to pay the tithe as a kind of tax. Instead of belonging to any owner like a slave, the land and everything that was on it was property of the elite, and the serfs were allowed to work on it as long as they pay their due toll. This particular form of human farming collapsed, however, when better forms of cultivation developed, greater areas condensed, and more peasants had to leave the acreage. It was possible to produce with less workers. This increase of productivity brought a surplus of groceries, which again made a growth of the cities possible. After that there came the fourth form, the so-called modern society. When the masses of uprooted masses flooded the cities, there was a great supply of cheap human capital, which was available for the aspiring industrialists. The ruling class realized very soon they can make more money by allowing their livestock to choose their own profession freely. With this current model, the direct slave ownership and servage has been replaced by the mafia model. The mafia usually does not own any enterprise or staff and resources. It only sends its debt collectors every month to cash their amount from the actual owners. Today, the government does nothing else by committing protection racket. It leads us to believe that it offers us protection for which we pay. At the same time, we actually have to be protected from itself. You may choose your own profession now, and you are allowed to own and keep your own enterprise, what increases your own productivity vastly, and thus the taxes and dues which you have to pay your masters. The few liberties are granted to you because this way you are more profitable for your owners. This is working so well that today's dues are at the highest point ever, and 3/4 of every year we work solely for the government. A very subtle slave farming which is operated when the slave doesn't even realize that he's actually a slave. Like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, "Nobody is more enslaved than the one who thinks he's free without being it." What now has become the true challenge for the real owners of the world is the growth of relative wealth and liberty which they allow you. Now it is threatening themselves. The ruling elite had profited from the free trade of capital and manpower. However, since its livestock had become more and more accustomed to its liberties, it had begun to ask why they need rulers over them in the first place, especially since they only consist of criminals who are corrupt and good for nothing. It had become an actual quandary for the ruling class. They are in conflict between the greed of more profit and the unwillingness to grant even more liberties. A typical example is China, where the communism coexists alongside capitalism. There is a political dictatorship, but there is also a free market economy. The Western model tends more and more towards this model, where freedom of opinion and human rights get more and more restricted, and the police state got introduced, but the economy is granted absolute freedom. Actually, this is the definition of fascism. The fusion of government's power with the corporation's power, where the absolute decisive state cares about the welfare and thinks for the people and lead them. To keep the tax-paying livestock within its enclosure is a process which proceeds in 3 phases. First, the young generation becomes indoctrinated through the education system by the state so that it only sees the fenced and controlled world as legitimate. Through this process, the thoughts are controlled and the mind is put in the wanted shape. The second phase is using the livestock against themselves to pit them against each other by creating dependent cattle, which are useful idiots, and giving them the task to control and betray their fellow cattles. It is very difficult to control the flock by direct force, and when used, it decreases the productivity dramatically. The former communist dictatorships are an example for this. When kept in strict captivity, people are not motivated and they don't produce efficiently. But when people think that they were free, then they will produce much more for their owners. Capitalism is the pretense of freedom. You are left with one freedom, to decide what to consume, which products to buy, though this is also controlled by advertisement subconsciously. The best way to maintain this illusion is to enhance some of the cattles and bring them to the other side of the fence. The animals which have become dependent on the hierarchy can make every other animal which dared to break ranks step back into the ranks. They will put down those who point out how immoral ownership and farming of humans is. If you manage to get the flock to attack each other, as soon as anyone reveals the situation they are in, then you don't have to expend much effort to suppress them directly. The dependent cattle will do the dirty job for the owner of the flock. The class of intellectuals, which was influenced by the indoctrination the most, and was corrupted by academic titles and privileges, will violently oppose any questioning of the advantages of such human farming. And the others, the animals depending on patronage of the owners, who thinks they are something better, like the class of artists and media representatives, they will tell everyone who demands freedom and escape that you jeopardize your fellow cattles. The flock will stay fenced by pushing the blame of immorality of the ruling system on those who actually demand and strive for freedom. The third phase is the creation of permanent external hazard, so the scared flock will seek protection of the owner. By constant artificial threat, the hysteric mass will be pushed in the desired direction and will only think of their survival. The flock owner will hire people to play the part of the wolf the whole night and howl and snarl. To be absolutely convincing, the owner will even attack his own flock and kill one cattle to make it look like there were actually predators out there, from whom the owner has to protect them. In this manner, they justify wars, in which fake enemies were created who supposedly threaten the flock. And the mass believes this and pulls in the battle for the owner, sacrifice their lives for his expansion of power. The wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sudan, Yemen or wherever, and the forthcoming war with Iran are not about democracy or freedom. This is ridiculous. It is all about profit, power and control in favor of the slave owners. But this kind of human farming has come to its end. The numerous crises which we experienced recently, the world economic crisis in particular, were created by the granted liberties. The increase of wealth in the last 100 years was created by the economic liberties. This very increase of wealth had made the power, extent and greed of the animal farmers go sky high. When the flock becomes more and more productive, then the quality of animal owners grows and the quantity of dependence of them. Economical liberties create wealth, and wealth attracts more and more thieves and crooks, whose greed then destroys the economical liberties. In other words, more and more parasites live on the flock and suck up its entire blood. The whole system is full of metastases, and they will become a lethal cancer ulcer, which leads to its certain death. A government apparatus which began small will always end as an unhuman monstrosity. This process explained why all livestock owners always seek to have larger and larger associations, why there is globalism, the NWO, the New World Order, with its ultimate goal, the dictatorial world government. All despots of the past wanted to rule the world, but only caused death, suffering and destruction in the end. That is why there is no alternative to a real, free and peaceful society which has a small, manageable structure. A society without any political leaders, without any power of people, and without paying more and more taxes to keep this insatiable Moloch alive, which is of the opinion that we humans are nothing more than cattle that may be fenced and exploited. Being really free is very simple, but at the same time very difficult. We don't have to put up with the assaults of the camp followers from within our own rows anymore. We have to wake up and finally see the fences, which keeps us incarcerated. When we realize our existence as human farming, then we do the first step to get rid of this enslavement for good. So let us tear down the fences and let us run on the open field, there where we can finally breathe freely. It is everyone's decision whether to be fed by a farmer in a dark shed, cared for and just vegetate in order to get milked every day, and then at the point where you do not produce enough milk eventually end in the slaughterhouse. Or you want to enjoy the sunlight, look for food on your own and be independent and free. One pig says to the other, "Listen, I have heard the rumor that the farmer just feeds us because he wants to slaughter us eventually." The other pig says, "Oh, it's always you with your conspiracy theories." Viva la pura vida!